Okay, today we are going to talk about analog vintage mixing consoles. And the question that many of us keep asking ourselves: do we really need an analog mixing console? And I have an answer on that question, at least from my point of view, that I am going to share with you. And in the end of this video, I'm going to share with you why we have no chance at all to stop buying things as soon as we fall into the gear acquisition syndrome. So make sure to stick till the end. My name is Moneeo. I'm a sound engineer, composer, musician and sound artist. And together with my wife and business partner Irene Moneeo, we run this channel where we talk about everything having to do with composing music, music production, and of course the renovation of this beautiful old Soundtracs Jade. And the big question today is, do we really need to buy vintage analog mixing consoles like these ones to make music? Well, we could make this video pretty short and just say, no, we don't need that today. We could mix in the box. Okay, see you next week. Bye. Wait a minute. I often hear this question: do we really need to have an analog mixing console? And I think that is just so funny when we're talking about music production. Do we really need to have this or that? Okay, so if we are going to ask a question that is that basic, then I guess we have to ask ourselves, do we really need to invest in a studio ourselves? There are so many studios all around the world. Or maybe even, do we even need to record one more song? Is it that the world really needs more music? I don't think so. And that would mean that, do we really need to compose any more music? Yeah, I know it's kind of silly, but if we are going to ask the questions, do we really need this or that in music production? Well, then we can ask the questions, do we really need to create more music? And the answer is, of course, no, we don't need that. But we want to create more music. We want to write songs. We want to record songs just because it's fun. And now I'm talking about recording music, composing music. And no, I'm not talking about prompting music for AI. Soundtracs maybe back in '96 thought that, well, we put a keyboard here if the people in the future might want to prompt music. No. This keyboard is, it's high-tech. It's for the automation of this console. Back to the question. The studio I had previous was totally in the box. And there were a couple of things that I were missing. And if we now want to create music, we find joy and pleasure in doing that, then we also have to find a workflow that we really love doing. And to be honest, I was quite tired mixing in the box. And there were a couple of needs I actually had, which this console has. Okay, I admit it, it's an overkill buying console for these reasons. The first reason: every time I recorded, I just plugged in and unplugged stuff in my sound card all the time. I was so tired of that. It felt like that was the only thing I did. So I had a really good need for getting some kind of console or whatever where I could have stuff plugged in all the time, and just when it's time to record, just bring the faders up, unmute the buttons and go. So that's the first reason why I bought a mixing console. And I admit, I don't need 32 channels at this point, but I'm having in mind the studio that I really want to have in the future. And then it makes total sense. Okay, so having plenty of inputs, so I can have all my instruments, microphones plugged in all the time, that's a really good reason and makes workflow a lot faster. There's a second reason why I bought this console is because it has something that I have been thinking about for so long. And that is a patchbay. Yeah. Oh my god. I hear how stupid it sounds, buying a 217 kilogram mixing console to get a patchbay. But this console has a patchbay built into it, where you have plenty of inputs and outputs that you want for each channel. But it also has a bunch of tie lines, meaning external inputs for whatever other equipment we want to bring into the console. So actually, the built-in Bantam patchbay is worth a lot to me. And if we have a look at what would just one rack unit of a Bantam patchbay cost me if I would buy one, the prices are ridiculous. And that's for a reason. The Bantam patchbays, they just keep working. And okay, this one is more than 30 years old, so I might have to spray it with some DeoxIT from time to time, but that seems to really do the trick with this one. No problem whatsoever with the patchbay. So yeah, if you find a console with a patchbay and you need a patchbay, buy the console. The third reason why I bought this console is actually because of sound quality. I had been thinking about this for so long and researching a lot about analog summing. There are many people claiming that analog summing makes such a great difference that it's totally worth it. And some people, they claim that analog summing is just bullshit. It doesn't have anything to do with it. But when listening to really good recordings where we can A/B test analog summing versus in the box, then it makes it really clear that the difference is, it's not huge, it's just so little. But when you start to hear it, that makes all the difference. And I had my eyes on this Neve analog summing mixer, and I was so close buying it when this console popped up. I don't have many outputs in the studio right now. I have 8 outputs from my RME interface. So the idea was that I can use these 8 channels to just try with the idea of analog summing and see for myself. Do I like it? Do I not like it? Does it make any difference? And if it makes any difference, do I like it? Do I not like it? I have no idea. Because of course, analog summing will make the sound different from mixing in the box. The question here is not, is it better? Is it worse? The question here is, do I like the results better when coming from an analog summing? Or do I like the in the box better? And normally my preferences is that whatever I send into my sound card, I want the exactly same signal coming out, which RMA is very good at. They're so transparent interfaces. But this would give me a chance to try analog summing and see what I think about it. And yet, yeah, it's a bit overkill buying a big console that eats all the floor space in your studio. But hey, why not? It's fun. And if we don't have fun, what's the point making music? Yeah. Okay, so that was 3 reasons to buy a mixing console that I admit it. This is overkill. I could have bought just a patchbay and an analog summing mixer, but that was actually 3 needs that I have and that the console fixed right away. And these decisions is based on the facts, the actual needs that I have in my studio. And then we come to the other aspect of buying a vintage analog mixing console. And that's the emotional part. And I think when we're talking about emotions and music technology, it's often gets misunderstood. because it matters. And in my case, it was actually a life-changing decision. And for those of you who already follow this channel already know that I was struck with hearing issues back during COVID time. I was having COVID infections twice. The first time COVID infection left me with hearing loss, which made me need to wear hearing aids. And the second COVID infection left me with severe tinnitus that kept me on a sick leave for 18 months. And that was honestly talking the worst period of my life. And I can say to you that when that happened, I decided right there and then that I will never ever work with music again. I went into a depression. I mean, getting hearing loss, having to use hearing aids. That was the worst nightmare I could think of. And I think many of you can relate to that as well. So when that happened, I thought I would never ever be able to work with music and sound again. I actually made a long list of all the bad things working as a sound engineer, so that I should not feel as bad leaving that career. But what happened was that with time I started to be able to start listening to music, soft music in the beginning, and I could listen to more and more music. I could finally pick up a guitar without it hurting my ears. I could start composing music softly, and I could go back to a life where music was an important part again. And at that point, I hadn't been working with live music for over a year. And what I realized, that what I missed with working as a sound engineer at live concerts, what did I really missed mixing music. And at that point in life, I could not mix live music. Where I'm now, I'm back working with live music as well, but at that point I could not do that. But I wanted to mix music, and I realized how much I had missed working in a studio environment with an old analog mixing console. I was running a commercial studio back in the 90s. That's quite a long time ago. And after that I mostly worked with live music. But I started to get a craving of getting back working in the studio. Because what's good in the studio, that's where I have the volume control and could make the volume at my workday just as what worked for me. So I started to researching analog consoles at that point. Just like we all do, I started hanging in different groups for different mixing consoles, and there was one mixing console that never left my mind, and that was the Soundtracs Jade. The first time I saw a Soundtracs Jade was at the music store Estrad in Stockholm here in Sweden. It was back in 1996, the last century. Oh my god, I sound so old. They had a Soundtracs Jade on display, and it was the most beautiful concert I had ever seen. Back then I owned a Fostex 812, which is not the coolest console, but it really did the job for me at that point. And this was the top of line, the dream. And the price was just, no way. There were no way I could afford a console like this. Of course. But now, 30 years later, I started hanging in Facebook groups about Soundtracs Jade. And the more I researched, the more I realized that this is still the console of my dreams. When looking to all the features it has, when looking how the equalizer works, because equalizer is so important for my workflow, that equalizer is so much more important than dynamics. That could be a discussion on its own. But for me, equalizers is the most important. And they are amazing on Soundtracs Jade. So the Soundtracs Jade is actually the console of my dreams. And have been that for 30 years. And then now it's here in my studio. And it's mind-blowing. Many people would say that a Neve or an SSL is their dream consoles. And sure, I would not mind a Neve or an SSL. I think I would prefer the Neve. But the price tag. But maybe in 30 years, I'll get a Neve console. Oh my god. But hey, yeah, this was my dream console and it still is. I don't need any more fancy console. I don't need an SSL and I don't need an Neve. And here we're back at the need discussion. And I certainly don't need a Soundtracs Jade, but I want one. And this is one of the consoles that is so much bang for the buck nowadays. They are definitely not cheap, but you get so much value for the money. The only problem with the Soundtracs Jade is that they are so hard to find, especially if you want to find it in the country where you live. It's not like this Focusrite console that were built in just 10 pieces, but the Soundtracs Jade are pretty hard to find on the used market, especially here in Sweden. I know about 2, maybe 3 persons having Soundtracs Jade here in Sweden. And it was one of these guys that told me that there was a Soundtracs Jade for sale in Stockholm. And I was just, what? And it was so strange when I kept asking, you know who the seller is? And he told me. And it turned out that I actually know the seller. We don't know each other very well, but we are both composers. We are both in the same composer society here in Sweden. And I had no idea he'd even own a Soundtracs Jade. And that it was for sale. That was strange. That really got me thinking. And I started to measure my small studio room, see if it would even be possible to get it in here. And yes, you can see it was possible. It's not much room for something else, but it got in here. So I am so grateful, and thank you, Lars, for tipping me about Martin, who were selling this console to me. I'm so grateful to both of them. At that point, we were still in lockdown here in Sweden, and so there were much time looking YouTube videos, and I started to watching people renovating mixing consoles. Old analog vintage consoles, and I thought that was so amazing. People taking care of this old beautiful equipment that worked a bit not that reliable all the time, but they put so much love into the work, bring them to life so they can keep working for many, many years. I just had a craving. I wanted to do something like that. So the fact that this console, it had some scratchy pots and there are some very scratchy switches and haven't been used for some time, so it really needed some work. But that was something that I actually looked forward doing. And that is something that I appreciate doing. And as you have noticed in this channel, there have been quite a few videos about that process. which I totally love. But here's the point. Why do we fall for buying all these things that we have in our studio? There are two reasons for that, why we can't ignore it. The gear acquisition syndrome is when we just can't stop thinking about a product that should fit perfect in our studio. And when we get this gear acquisition syndrome, two things happening. We have emotions that we really want this thing. We really crave for it. We really want to see it in our studio. I can admit, I had that feeling very much. And at the same time, our brain is telling us that it doesn't make sense buying this thing. It's maybe too large, or it's too expensive, or choose something else. Then our brain steps into analytic mode and starts to give us reason why we actually need this one. And these discussions don't even have to be true. They can be quite silly. Like in my case, I admit it. It's a bit silly. My intellectual brain told me, hey, I really need a patchbay, so I really need to buy this console. It's worth the money. Or my brain saying, hey, I really need all these inputs for all my synthesizers and microphones, so I can have them plugged in at all time, which is kind of true, but yeah, we don't have to actually buy a mixing console for that. So when our brain has built up the reasons why we actually need to have this kind of stuff, then we fall back into our emotions and the craving is just taking over. And we just hit that buy button. And that doesn't have to be a mixing console. It can be a guitar, it can be an effect, it can be an interface with too many inputs and outputs, more than we need. It can be, I don't know, whatever. But I think it's important to realize that we have these two sides of our brain, the emotional part and the analytic part. And that the emotional part most of the time takes over. The analytic part is just justifying why we want to buy it. But the emotional part of the brain is the stronger ones. And it doesn't matter if it comes to like buying a car. You buy a specific brand many times just because of an emotion. You have an emotional contact with that brand. And for me, there was one thing that I haven't mentioned for you yet that convinced me that I just need to have this specific console. And that reason, it's so fascinating itself that we're going to make another video about it. And that's it's mind-blowing, I'm telling you. When I heard about that, it was a no-brainer. I need to save this console. I can't let anyone else do it. So that's my reasons why buying an analog vintage mixing console in the 20th century. So keep this in mind the next time you or someone else is saying we don't need mixing consoles today. We can just mix in the box. Oh, I can't imagine you stayed for so long. I had so much to talk about this. I thought it should be a short video, but it turned out it didn't. But I'm so happy you stayed till the end. That probably means that you have a passion, just like me and Irene, for old beautiful things like this and other music technology that has an emotion and story to it. And we are going to talk more about that in upcoming videos. But for now, breathe, relax, and we'll see you in the next video. Ciao!